on formal aspects of quantum field theory, string theory, and general relativity. I welcome you, sir, from bottom of my heart. We are very fortunate you for agreeing to deliver today's lecture. As we all know, and also have gone through his various online lectures on quantum mechanics, sir, you are internationally well known and therefore does not need any introduction. Also, for the young generation, we have already provided your very short CV on the website and Facebook. I have a request to all the participants to first listen sir's lecture, and at the end you may also question based on the present lecture. Professor Kulshrestha sir will also take your earlier questions too if time will permit. With these few words, I would like to request Professor Kulshrestha sir, please deliver today's lecture. Thank you, sir.
Uh, Thank you, Venkatesh ji. Thank you very much for your very, very kind words. And truly speaking, I feel very highly honored and privileged uh, for having this opportunity to be able to talk to you, to your distinguished faculty, to your loving student. I find them extremely sincere and hardworking actually. Your entire team, I have my heartfelt thanks to your entire team. And then I think we could take off for the today's talk. So, in fact, uh, as I understand that many of your students are going through my video lectures on quantum mechanics. Perhaps some of them might have even looked at the lectures on string theory and lectures on superstring theory. So, I mean, this was one of the primary reasons that I chose to talk about this quantum mechanics. And uh, so I think coming to physics, you see, in the last 100 years or so, we have been blessed with two landmark theories. One of them is your general relativity, which talks about the laws of cosmos, physics of universe, physics of solar system, physics of galaxies, physics of black holes, neutron stars, boson stars, and such things. So essentially, large physics at large scales, and this is a beautiful classical field theory of gravity, extremely successful and extremely well tested also. And the other landmark theory, we will have occasions to talk about it at some point of time, as the time is limited. So we uh, uh, today confine ourselves more with the so-called that I'm referring to as the second theory. This is the quantum theory or quantum mechanics. You see, the general relativity holds true or describes physics at large distances, and quantum mechanics, quantum theory, it's one synonymous words, quantum field theory, quantum mechanics, quantum theory. Uh, so this describes laws of microcosmos, physics at short distances. Okay, and Professor Atwood, one of the very well-known physicists, uh, I had occasion to hear him several times. He talks about the universe inside the atom. So when you talk about the physics at short distances, velocities also become increasingly larger and larger and almost comparable to the velocity of light. So you see, uh, This is also one of the extremely successful theories. In fact, the marriage of special relativity and quantum mechanics yields a wonderful theory which is called as the quantum field theory. This quantum field theory is one of the most accurate theories of nature that we have known so far. And this is being summarized into the so-called standard model of particle physics, which describes quantization of electromagnetic field, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. So, and this standard model, which is based on the relativistically invariant quantum gauge field theory, is an extremely well-tested, experimentally extremely well-tested theory, which has been tested to several digits by now. Even some decades ago, when one knew very well only the simplest theory like QED, quantum electrodynamics, so the calculation of the, for example, the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron, it required the calculation of 72 Feynman diagrams. And its experimental verification with the theoretical prediction some decades ago was already up to 7 or 8 digits, you see. So this theory is one of the extremely well-tested theory, one of the most accurate theories of nature. Now, you see, what happens in special relativity? You have equivalence of mass and energy. What you have in quantum theory, what you have in quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, you have the possibility of creating energy out of vacuum, which is not really empty, but is a boiling soup of particles being created and destroyed continuously. This very characteristic of quantum mechanics provides a consistent mechanism to unify quantum mechanics with special relativity and to give us quantum field theory. So for this, I would just take up a simple example, namely that of a one-dimensional harmonic oscillator in quantum mechanics. And those of you are aware, I might come back to it again, but let me at least refer to it a little bit. So in this, you make a pocket space decomposition for the coordinates x and the momentum pl. You just introduce it for x, it automatically follows for the pl. So similarly, after some time, when we talk about field theory, we would be able to make Fock space decomposition for all the fields, whether scalar field, vector field, or spinor field. And this is done in terms of the so-called annihilation and creation operators, and you introduce the so-called number density operator. So the best example that one can learn is already within the simplest form of quantum mechanics, namely one-dimensional harmonic oscillator, which we keep learning right from first year level in different ways. Okay, so you make a linear expansion of Fourier expansion of x in terms of some annihilation and creation operators, then that of momentum also follows, and then you can construct the n particle states, vacuum state, one particle state, two particle state. You see, so if you operate on the vacuum state by the creation operator once, what happens? Particle is not created, but the eigenvalue increases by 1, which means creation of one unit of quantum energy h cross omega. If you operate the n particle state with a annihilation operator, the eigenvalue decreases by 1, which means the destruction or annihilation of quantum unit of energy by the amount h cross omega. And if you apply a dagger times a, which is number density operator, obviously, so it operates on some energy eigencat n, it gives you the eigenvalue n times the energy eigencat n. So what happens? So this n, which is a dagger a, serves the purpose of a preservation operator, which we call as the in our Hindu philosophy, it's called Vishnu. So creation operator, uh, the analogy goes with Brahma, and the destruction operator goes with the Shiva. So you have annihilation, creation operators, and the preservation operator. And let me tell you, in my when I thought about this talk, it came to my mind that I should give you a good exposure. So you see, what you obtain in one-dimensional harmonic oscillator, it applies also to three-dimensional harmonic oscillator. And when you apply it to, let us say, a scalar field theory, which I would describe shortly, or a vector field theory, or a spinor field theory, the exactly same algebra, same concept, they hold true for all kinds of field theories. And not only that, if you go to string theory, at some point of time we will talk about it, then this analogy and this concept goes extremely consistently well all the way up to string theory. So same, I mean, you take the vacuum state, you apply creation operators, and the eigenvalue gets increased by 1. That is how you construct a one particle state, two particle state with the successive application of these operators, and so on. So here actually I just wanted to refer to you that in quantum mechanics we have the possibility of creating energy out of vacuum. Okay, which is not empty, as I said. So you apply this successive application of your creation and creation operators on the vacuum state. You can create one particle, two particle, n particle state, which holds true not only in quantum mechanics, but even quantum mechanics is actually also a part of quantum field theory. We will gradually move into that. So you see what happens now. You know about the you have heard of these four interactions: gravitational, strong, weak, and electromagnetic interactions. So the conventional quantum field theory talks about the quantization of these three fundamental forces of nature: electromagnetic, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. You also know, you also call them the quantum electrodynamics, quantum chromodynamics, and electroweak theory. All of them could be combined into, put together into so-called standard model. And here in the standard model, uh, before I describe the main results, I mean outcome of the standard model, let me just remind you that in the ancient times, our philosophers told us, Chit, Jal, Pavak, Gagan, Samira, air, water, fire, earth, sky, the 5 basic ingredients of life. And it's known from Indian philosophy, from Greek philosophy, and so on. But now, what is the current status of these constituents of matter is given not by philosophy, but by standard model. Okay, and field theory is the mathematical language for standard model. So what does this standard model tell us? That all matter consists of molecules, molecules consist of atoms, atoms consist of nuclei, nuclei consist of neutrons and protons. Okay, and of course atom, not only nuclei but also electrons. Okay, so and the neutrons and protons in turn then consist of quarks. So our current knowledge of field theory or standard model, okay, is that we have 6 quarks called as up, down, strange, charm, beauty, and talk. And I will shortly come to describe their main characteristics, features. And 6 leptons: electron, electronic neutrino, muon, muonic neutrino, tauon, tauonic neutrino, and the vector gauge bosons. Now, let me first come back to classical mechanics, classical physics once again. So what you have, the 2 electrons, let us say, or an electron positron, they pass by each other And how do they interact? They just deflect each other's trajectory. What happens quantum mechanically? Quantum mechanically, what happens? One electron emits a photon and the other electron absorbs that photon. So there is a actual exchange of a photon, which is a vector particle. You know the standard electromagnetic theory. It's given by A mu with 4 components: A0, A1, A2, A3. A0 and A3 are time-like and longitudinal components. And so the real degrees of freedom of the electromagnetic field are 2, which are given by A1 and A2, the transverse components of the electromagnetic field. Now, I will come back to this little bit later. In the meantime, let me first describe a few more things about the classical versus quantum physics or quantum mechanics. Then I will always come back to the field theoretic basis of a standard model or the standard model. So let me briefly tell you some basic fundamentals of classical and quantum mechanics. What happens in classical mechanics or classical physics? This classical mechanics is a deterministic theory. What does it mean? If I have an object in my hand and I particle or chalk piece or whatever, I throw it, then it will follow a particular trajectory, and we know that this trajectory is going to be a parabola. At the first year level, you can determine using just simple laws of mechanics the path. Once you know the initial conditions, you can determine the dynamics of the system at each and every point of the trajectory, everything about the system. So classical mechanics, classical physics is deterministic. And one more important point about this is the entire dynamics of the system is encoded or is contained in a quantity in some object which is called as the Lagrangian, which is the difference of the kinetic and potential energy. Kinetic energy minus the potential energy is called as the Lagrangian. And if you sum the Lagrangian over all time from minus to plus infinity, what you construct is called as the action. In field theory, on the other hand, we talk about Lagrangian density, which is Lagrangian per unit volume. And so if you sum the Lagrangian density for the entire volume, you create the Lagrangian. And if you sum it over the not only entire space, but also entire time, you create the action. And we know, you see, even though sometimes some students at the early age, they happen to have an idea that, oh, quantum mechanics is the ultimate theory and maybe classical mechanics is wrong. So let me warn you here, classical mechanics, classical physics is the richest in contents. Okay, we only need to modify our concepts properly. How do we learn the things? How do we interpret our things? Now, let us mention a little bit about quantum mechanics. So what happens? Quantum mechanics is actually probabilistic. It's based on the statistical interpretation. Okay, and how? So let me illustrate this point. So let me first take a very simple example of a two-slit experiment. Okay, so let me consider a monochromatic beam of light consisting of, let us say, single photons, and we put a beam splitter. We can split it, we reduce the intensity, we create, in the first place, I'm not an experimentalist, but people know how to do it. So you can create a beam of single photons. You use the splitter to create two beams out of it, and you make them pass through a double slit. Okay, and you collect your spectrum on the other side of the screen. Now what happens? So if you denote, I would talk in terms of the state vector. So let me just define the way classical mechanics is determined or defined in terms of something called as the Lagrangian. Okay. Similarly, quantum mechanics tells us that the entire information about a system is contained in the so-called state vector. You see, I am right from the beginning, I am trying to use the terminology and the formulation which is developed by none other than Mr. Paul Dirac, who talks about, and this is called as the abstract formulation of quantum mechanics, or Dirac's abstract formulation of the quantum mechanics. This is based on the Dirac's bra and cat notations. Okay, so here one talks about a state vector, and it's just one or two lines job to convert to construct a wave function out of a state vector. So if you take inner product of a state vector alpha with some eigenbra of position space, this would give you the wave function in the configuration space. If you take the inner product of this state vector with the eigenbra of in the momentum space p or p prime, you will construct the wave function in the momentum space. And here it's very easy to convert one from the other, one to the other. So wave function in the configuration space to the wave function in the momentum space, and vice versa. Okay. So now let us come back to the two-slit experiment. So this the single photon before the splitting, let me denote it by some state vector psi. It's written by in the cat notation. So you write this vertical line psi and this sign of greater than. Okay, I'm not using any slides, so never mind. But I would be able to convey my thoughts to you. And so after the splitting of the beam, if you express them by psi1 and psi2, okay, then the psi would be equal to some C1 psi1 plus C2 psi. Okay, and this C1 and C2 are some complex numbers. Okay, so one is working in a complex linear Hilbert space. You see, the dimensionality of the Hilbert space depends on the physical problem. In this case, the dimensionality of the Hilbert space would be only 2. So here, just let me define what a Hilbert space is. As long as all the inner products are positive definite, okay, or the norms are positive definite, then automatically expectation value also would be positive definite. Then such a space is called as the Hilbert space. Okay, so positive definiteness of the inner product of two vectors or the norm of a vector, this is the primary condition. Okay, so now you see, classically these photons, you see, if I send, for example, a photon and in front of two slits, you see the photon could pass either through A or through B. In quantum mechanically, it can
Hello? Hello, we are not able to hear you, sir. Hello?
Maybe sir's connection is not stable.
He will connect again.
Okay, we'll wait, sir.
Sure, we should. We can see he is online. So maybe some problem in his internet connection.
Internet problem, sir.
Hello? Oh, sir, we are not able to hear you. Now it's offline.
Yes.
Now he will again connect and then it will work.
Yes, sir.
ऑल करें क्या सर को?
No, sir. Maybe you can try to contact him and see the situation.
ओके,
Yeah. Uh, Yes, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir. So, sister, sir, please unmute yourself. You are not audible, sir.
Is it
Yeah.
okay now? Is
Yeah.
it
Now,
okay?
yes, sir. Now it's okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Continue.
Actually, there was some interruption on my side from the internet,
Yes, sir.
and I suppose it's okay now once again.
Yeah.
Uh,
You can
yes.
continue.
Okay. So I was considering the photon polarization experiment. You see, I consider three different cases. Each time the photon is traveling along the z direction. Once it is polarized along x direction, once it is polarized along y direction, and third time it is polarized along an arbitrary direction which is lying in the xy plane. Okay. So now if I denote the first two, in the first two cases, the state vector psi1, psi2, in the third case, I denote it by psi3, then psi3 would be a superposition of the two, psi1 and psi2. I hope it is clear. And this C1 and C2, the notation I'm using the same. You could call it by any name, state vectors alpha, beta, or gamma. It does not matter. So the point is, this superposition principle is the basic fundamental in quantum mechanics, and these coefficients C1, C2, etc., they are complex, of course, and their mod squares, they represent the probability of the occurrence of that system in that particular state. Okay. And so, and obviously the entire probability is going to be 1. So C1 square plus C2 square plus C3 square, uh, if it is an n-dimensional space, then this whole thing together summed up would be equal to 1. So this is, you see, the point here is the quantum mechanics is probabilistic, it has statistical interpretation, and the principle of superposition is the basic thing. So you see, in classical mechanics, we were working in a n-dimensional Euclidean space. Now we are working in a n-dimensional complex vector, linear vectors. Okay, and so this is, I mean, something that tells me about. Now one more very fundamental experiment I would wish to mention that changed the uh, entire scenario in the context of quantum mechanics. So with that, people started calling the earlier theories as old quantum theory, and this people started calling as the new quantum theory or the modern quantum mechanics. And this all happened, you see, during the 1920s. So there is a famous experiment called Stern-Gerlach experiment. What you do is you pass the silver atoms through inhomogeneous magnetic field, and you collect this line on some screen, and you observe the spectrum, and you try to see what you are getting. So silver atom has 47 electrons, so 46 are they, you can say, so it's essentially a one electron kind of a system, and the magnetic moment of this atom is proportional to the orbital angular momentum vector L, capital L, which has 2L plus 1 eigenvalues, where this 2L plus 1 L is small. It takes all integer values. So you see, this experiment I am talking about 1921-22. You see, and by that time, we did not know about spin angular momentum and spin quantum number. That was not known until that time. So why it is landmark, you will realize very soon that, and then, so then there were two guys, Uhlenbeck and Gordesmith. I mean, everybody wanted to explain. You see, if you have to be an experimentalist, you have to be such a refined and serious experimentalist that people take you so seriously. Then people thought, yes, this Gerlach guy came from somewhere to Gerlach in Frankfurt. They performed this experiment, and they thought, oh, we get two lines. But according to the theory of orbital angular momentum, you should get only one line. You see, 12 plus 1 is an odd number, as you can see. So in any case, you should have odd lines, but here you have two lines. Why? Then eventually this Uhlenbeck and Gordesmith, they thought about, could there be some intrinsic angular momentum of something of that type? It eventually turned out that this was due to the spin, and if you have 2s plus 1 eigenvalues, where s not only takes integer values but also fractional values. So 0, 1 half, 1, 3 half, 2, 5 half, and so on. Then for s equal to 1 half, you can just explain the two lines that you obtain in your Stern-Gerlach experiment. And so this actually, and Pauli, couple of years later, around 1925-26, gave it the name spin angular momentum. And now you know that s cross by 2 times the vector sigma, which is a Pauli vector, is the spin angular momentum. So you have three components, sx, xy, s by sz. In this particular case, when I mentioned that if you apply the magnetic field along the z direction, then the z component of the spin angular momentum gets quantized to plus 1 half h cross and minus 1 half h cross. You see, so but there is nothing so special about z direction. You could choose any other direction, and that particular, I mean, spin angular momentum along that direction would get quantized. This is called as space quantization. At that time, it was called as space quantization. You see, so this gave rise to the concept of a new concept of a spin quantum number, which can be parameterized in terms of the spin angular momentum. And now you see, I come back to the standard model that I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, so you see, these quarks and leptons, they are fermions. You see, they are spin 1 half particles. You see, whereas photons or gluons, they have integer spins. Okay, so integer spins are bosons. Okay, pi meson is an integer, I mean, spin 0 particle. Mu is vector is different, but it has spin 1. So gluons also are having integer spin. Graviton is also having integer spin. So any particle that has integral spin would be a boson. So now what is so special about this? You see, this gave rise to the whole classification of Bose-Einstein and Fermi-Dirac statistics, spin statistics theorem. Okay, so these objects with fractional spin angular momentum would fall in the category of fermions, and the other ones would fall in the category of bosons. And this is how, so you keep coupling your knowledge from quantum mechanics to its generalization field theory to standard model, and you see everything is fully consistent and extremely great. You see, so I mean, this is one thing. Actually, it's such a topic that I can speak for hours. But let me tell the some main in a particular thematic manner. So you see, this is now. I again come back to that classical and quantum description of the scattering of two electrons passing by each other in classical physics, classical mechanics. They do not exchange any particle, but according to quantum field theory, they exchange a vector boson, in this case a photon. So this electromagnetic force, electromagnetic field, electromagnetic force, this has this one carrier of force, which is photon. The quantum chromodynamics has 8 carriers of force, which are called 8 gluons. Electroweak theory has 3 force carriers, W plus, W minus, and G0. You see, in almost everything in this field has got a Nobel Prize. So it's not even worth mentioning, because everything, every word that you speak is associated with some great discovery, invention, and now I again come back to quantum mechanics. So here you develop, you know about the time evolution operator. You calculate the matrix element of a time evolution operator between initial and final state, that would, and its absolute square. This will give you the transition probability for a system to evolve from time t1 to t2. And if you write the Schrodinger equation for this uh, time evolution operator, you invert it, you get an integral equation, and you try to solve it iteratively, and you get the so-called Dyson series, which involves infinite number of integrals over the times. Okay, here in quantum mechanics, things are functions of time. So interaction Hamiltonian at each point is also a function of time. But from this, I could construct a covariant perturbation theory. Okay, and then that would be the covariant perturbation theory would then describe. So in the very beginning, I said that it's necessary to marry special relativity with quantum mechanics if you want to do any meaningful thing. Of course, with non-relativistic quantum mechanics, you can describe a whole lot of atomic and molecular physics, at least in the Schrodinger approach, for example. And even if you want to do nuclear physics, you will have to come to at least relativistic corrections or some field theoretic approach. And beyond that, if you want to talk anything about particle physics, it would be meaningless to talk about it without the concept of a field theory. So let me tell you a few things about this for very young students. You see what happens. Let us consider a non-relativistic expression for energy. What is this? Kinetic energy is p square by 2r. And what you do? Potential energy is, of course, you can always add some potential. So in this kinetic energy, what you do? You replace this energy and momentum by the appropriate quantum mechanical operators. Everybody knows iota h cross del over del t, and this iota h cross del over del x, or gradient of x. So, and if you apply a state vector to both sides of this expression for energy, what you get is a Schrodinger equation. Okay. So obviously, I'm using non-relativistic expression for energy. It is going to be a non-relativistic equation, wave equation. And now let me instead use the relativistic expression for energy. What is this? So you just write p square, which is p mu square of the 4 momentum. And now two aspects. In the first place, when p square is m square c square, then this is called as mass shell condition. So mass shell condition holds true for physical particles. When the mass shell condition does not hold, the particles cannot be physical particles. They can be virtual particles or something. Okay. So mass shell condition is very important. And then p mu is vector p, this p0 square minus vector p square in some choice of the metric tensor, +1 -1 -1. Now, so here you again apply the state vector on both sides, and what you obtain now, this is the Klein-Gordon equation. So Klein-Gordon equation is a relativistic wave equation. Okay, and similarly, I could obtain the, originally Maxwell's equations and Dirac equation, they were all obtained by their original inventors as single particle relativistic wave equations. So let's just talk about Klein-Gordon equation. So here in this Klein-Gordon equation, this object phi, which is a function of x, y, z, and t, this is interpreted as the wave function. Now let us have a look into the, when you had non-relativistic energy, you had phi star phi. What was this? This was probability density. It was in non-relativistic quantum mechanics, it was interpreted as the probability density, and it was obviously always positive definitely. However, when I consider the relativistic equation like the Klein-Gordon equation, that is but just natural, you see. I have only replaced the expression for energy by the relativistic expression. That's it. So here now this rho comes out to be phi star times phi dot minus phi into phi star dot. Dot is time derivative times some constants iota h cross by 2m, etc., etc. Now you see, so there is a minus sign in between. But it tells me that this rho could be positive, it could not be positive. So it's not always positive definitely. So one has to abandon the interpretation of rho as the probability density. Actually, it turns out that this rho is to be correctly interpreted as the time-like component of the forecurrent J mu. So it's the other vector J is your vector current J mu, and J0 is your rho. Okay, by C. So you always can take care of the units. So this is one thing. Another thing is that here you also obtain negative energy solutions in the theory. You see, for free particle theory, it doesn't matter whether you have negative energy solutions or not. But for physically interacting theory, you cannot, then the negative energy solutions are not accepted. You see, these are some again drawbacks, and therefore one looks forward to something beyond it again. So what is the correct way to do it? The correct way to do it is to write down a Lagrangian density or a Lagrangian or an action of a scalar field theory, maybe a complex scalar field theory, use the variational principle, derive the equations of motion or the Euler-Lagrange equations of motion, and you end up with the Klein-Gordon equation. So you will say that this equation is the same as this. Very often I find that many of my younger friends, they keep confusing. They say Klein-Gordon equation is the same or Dirac equation is the same. What new has happened? The new thing that has happened is now this field phi, this equation is no longer a single particle wave equation, but it is a field equation obtained from the variational principle applied to some action. The same is true for Dirac equation. It was originally obtained by Mr. Dirac around 1928. It was written down. So you see, that also connects me back to the spin quantum number. You see, then Dirac, that was around 1925-26 when spin quantum number was established. Spin quantum number is as important in physics as the charge of an electron or the mass of an electron. The quantum, the spin quantum number is equally important. In this sense, it is very fundamental. And then Mr. Dirac developed the whole Dirac equation, which describes spin 1/2 particles, and he explicitly incorporated spin into account. And in fact, this solution psi is called as a spinor. So, but in relativistic quantum mechanics, it would be interpreted as the single particle wave equation, whereas in field theory, it would be a field equation obtained by applying the variational principle to the Dirac-Lagrangian. You see here, let me give something very crucial for the students, that the very famous celebrated books by Bjorken and Drell, volume 1 is on relativistic quantum mechanics. So all that thing holds true, all entire algebra holds true, but you have to interpret it differently, okay? So the psi is to be interpreted as a field. And now, as I introduced annihilation and creation operators in my one-dimensional harmonic oscillator, if I do it for the field theory for scalar field phi, or for the spinor field psi, or for the electromagnetic field A mu, then you would have some annihilation, creation operators and preservation number operators. You see, So when you calculate the Hamiltonian density of any of these field theories, okay, then eventually you have to normal order the things, which means the A dagger has to stay to the left and A has to stay to the right. Okay, this comes from the Fock space decomposition of phi or psi, and I would not have time, so let me try to be a little bit faster. And but you can read. I'm leaving some scope for reading and understanding at each and every point. Okay, so and in fact, when you try to normal order the Hamiltonian density, in the case of Dirac theory, you discover a great thing. You see that you automatically invent anti-commutation relations unless you impose anti-commutation relation on your annihilation and creation operators. Your energy density will not be positive definite. Okay, when Dirac was genius, he was even able to interpret corresponding to the negative energy solutions. He was able to predict antimatter. You see, so these are landmark first 33 decades of the last, I mean, 20th century. I mean, the whole everything was invented. In a way, we are lucky that we have all these things ready in our hands and we can proceed further. So that's why it's our responsibility. Our elders have done a lot of hard, sincere work, great discoveries. We need to take it forward. That's our responsibility. So this, I hope, gives you some flavor, okay? And you can couple all this language with your standard model physics. Why I always refer to standard model physics is that it's something which is directly testable in your experiments, like the one carried out at CERN. My friend Professor Venkatesh Singh ji is a great, one of the great partners. So you are lucky to have him at your Central University in South Bihar. Now you are going to be a part of this experiment. They are discovering many great things. You see, each one of single of the discovery gets a Nobel Prize. So because it's so fundamental in nature, you see all these quark, each and every lepton and neutrino and whatsoever. You see, talking about the spin, the Dirac equation holds true for spin 1/2 particles. You can, Hermann Weyl was able to write down Weyl equations, which holds true for spin 1/2 but massless particles. You see, so this is how the brains work. You see, these genius guys, and this describes, you see, right-handed and left-handed neutrinos. You see, the direction of propagation or the momentum vector and the spin vector. You see, I even have this thing. Can you see it? This is a spinning top. This is one of my favorite games that I have on my table all the time. Are you able to see this spinning top?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yes. So you see, spin is a very, very important concept. You see, this gave rise to a whole lot of. So your neutrinos with left-handed, right-handed neutrinos, then these Weyl spinners. Okay, not only Dirac, everything you see so wonderful. Then my watch tells me 2:54. Let me mention a few more things before I stop. So you see, now there is another beautiful symmetry in nature that exists in nature. This is called a supersymmetry. So it relates bosons and fermions. Okay, for mathematicians, it's much easier that you have a bosonic operator and a fermionic operator, and you invent one more operator that converts your bosonic variables into fermionic and vice versa. Okay, so with this you can do with the help of some Grassmann spinners, which are also anti-commuting. So you see, if you multiply psi or psi bar with another fermionic variable, it gives you a bosonic variable. So what happens? There is one beauty about this. Those who are interested could look at so-called Best-Umino model, and you see, one would like to introduce supersymmetry into a standard model, and one would like to construct a so-called supersymmetric standard model. What would you achieve? You again achieve quite a lot further. Okay, then each particle would also have a supersymmetric partner. Okay, So a boson would have a fermionic partner, fermion would have a bosonic partner, and so on. So I'm just giving you, opening the scope for thoughts for the younger students, how they should think, they should extend the horizons of thinking much beyond, you see. And but again, you see, my batch has started reminding me, but you see, this the supersymmetry that you have in the so-called standard model is a supersymmetry which is called as rigid supersymmetry. This gauge parameter is actually a global gauge parameter, so it does not depend on time. So it's a constant spinner. And what it means is that our original standard model was a gauge theory. However, the supersymmetric standard model, the supersymmetric standard model is not a gauge theory. And you would like, if I had time, I would have told you the more intricacies about gauge symmetry. The local gauge symmetry is a very rich symmetry which leads to the conservation of charge. You see, why do we measure the electronic charge? Whether you measure it in Delhi or in Gaya or in London or in Frankfurt, everywhere it would mean it would have the same value. So this is a consequence of the conservation of the charge of that theory. Okay, and so, and this conservation of charge follows from the invariance of the theory under a local gauge symmetry. Okay, so we would love to have local gauge symmetry in our supersymmetric standard model, and if you do that, you may be surprised. Just couple of minutes, I'm closing. So if you try to do that, then you automatically also introduce gravity into your theory. Should I stop? I take another 3 minutes. So if you try to, so whether you try to make the supersymmetry as a local supersymmetry, that would automatically imply you will have to introduce gravity into theory. Or if you introduce gravity into your standard model, it would automatically become acquire local gauge symmetry, local supersymmetry. And that theory is called as supergravity theory. It does many more things for you. It makes many more, many divergences get cancelled. And however, in all these theories that I have referred today in my talk, all kinds of field theories, including supersymmetric field theories, the interaction vortices, like if you consider Compton scattering, electron, photon, they come together and meet, and eventually they again give in the final state a electron and a photon. So these interaction vertices are zero-dimensional vertices because the interacting particles are zero-dimensional particles and fields. And this renormalization has to do with this because the singularity introduced at r equal to 0 from the zero-dimensional vertices in field theory is taken care of by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It smears out the singularity at r equal to 0. But in gravity theory, it doesn't work because we don't have that Heisenberg uncertainty.
Hello.
Yes, sir. I think again the same problem of internet. Maybe.
Right, right. So he will connect again. Then
Yeah.
we
You
will
will
end and take the question. Yeah.
yeah.
Hello.
Maybe, sir, you
We-
need to contact him again.
Yes, I think so because it's
Yeah.
outside. It's raining very heavily,
Yeah. Now
and
he has left,
maybe
so maybe he will join again.
okay. Okay, sure, sure.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
I think now it's okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm really sorry for the interruptions at my end. Twice this internet dissed me. I am so sorry.
No
For,
problem.
for no fault of ours, this is the internet connection.
Right,
Anyway,
sir.
I think I'm through with my talk. And you see,
Okay, sir.
these topics are so dear to me at my heart. I could talk endlessly, but let us, for today, let us stop there. My talk, I mean, we could continue with what you, again, the
Okay, sir.
internet.
Thank you. Thank you, Kulshestra, sir.
Okay,
Thank you. Now
thank
I
you.
will request. Now I will request Budhenji and Puneet Kumar. Please take the question
Yeah.
of the student and ask to
Yes.
the sir. Please.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Just wait 1 minute. I'm not able to. Am I able to see or?
Yes, sir, you will
No,
see.
it's fine. Yeah, you can see also.
Everything is okay, sir. I will ask the students to unmute, and then when he will ask the question, you can see him. Maybe.
Okay. All right,
So, first question is from Sekhar Physics. So I would like to ask Sekhar to unmute and ask the question.
Mhm.
Sekhar, MSc
Yes, sir.
fourth semester. Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I have a confusion that uh, uh, yes, sir.
Yes.
The vector itself is actually independent of coordinate meaning, sir. Then what is so special in Paul Dirac's concept of uh, bra and kids notation that actually makes state vectors?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I could not understand your first
Hello, sir.
part of your question. Yeah. What is the first part of your question?
Sir, vector itself
Yeah.
independent of coordinate meaning.
Yeah.
So, what is the special in Paul
Yeah.
Dirac's bra-Kitts notation
Yeah.
that makes the state vectors independent of coordinate meaning?
Uh, well, these state vectors are really not related to coordinates either. So I'm not clear about your question actually. I would suggest that you try to look at this formalism of bra and cat notation. Uh, Firstly, independent of the wave function approach, and then connect it with the wave function approach, and then you will see the equivalence between the two. Okay.
Okay,
So
sir.
the only thing, let me try to illustrate it. I gave you some examples of two slit experiment and photon polarization experiment. So you see what happens in your classical physics that uh, uh, in quantum physics that I wrote psi equal to C1 psi 1 plus C2 psi2. So this in classical physics, this would be some not state vectors, but some. So this would be the modulus square of psi would be interpreted as the intensity. Okay, and similarly for psi1 and psi2. So, but in quantum mechanics, they would be interpreted as the probabilities, not the intensities. Okay, this is one main difference. I think I haven't, except for describing that photon polarization experiment, I talked about traveling along direction and polarized along some direction. But in principle, I mean that formalism holds true for any arbitrary state vector. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir,
That-
can
that
I
was-
ask can I ask one more question?
As you wish, as you wish.
Yes. Uh, Actually, sir, you have also talked about Hilbert space.
Yes.
So I have also a confusion related to property of one of the property of Hilbert space.
Yes.
That it states the Hilbert space is
Yeah.
complete and separable.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there is a property called Hilbert space is
Mhm.
separable.
Mm-hmm. So
What
what
does
is your, no?
uh,
Well, I think both of your statements are correct actually, and there is no confusion. So completeness, is it referring to the entire probability 1 equal to C1 square plus C2 square plus C3 square and so on? Is that what you mean?
I actually want
By completeness you mean closure property here?
oh yes sir, yes. I want to actually ask hello.
Yes.
I want to actually ask sir,
Yes.
what does it mean actually when we say Hilbert space is separable?
Hilbert space as separable. Well, I really still don't get your this question too. You see, for me, the modulus of psi1 square and psi2 square, etc., would mean the I mean they are square of these amplitudes of this, that the state is system is in the state psi1 or in the state psi2. So actually, if you normalize it to unity, then the inner product of psi1 with psi1 would be 1, inner product of psi2 with psi2 would be 1, inner product of psi with psi would be 1. So what you are left with is 1 equals to C1 square plus C2 square plus C3 square and so on. And I mean, at least with respect to my talk, there shouldn't be any confusion. Yes.
Okay sir.
I would suggest you now have another look at all these things once again. I do hope that your understanding improves from here. You see the psi1 psi2 which could be interpreted as the intensity. I mean, there are square such intensities in classical physics. Now they are interpreted differently. That is the only thing. Yeah.
Okay sir. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So please, Sekhar, unmute. Oh, sorry, mute yourself.
Okay sir.
The
Okay.
next question is from Abhijit.
Mhm.
Abhijit, please unmute yourself and ask the question and then mute yourself.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
Sir, in starting of your talk, you discussed about boson stars. Sir,
Yeah.
please put some lights on that.
Oh, so that is studied completely in the so-called gravity theory. What do? You again construct like any field theory. You construct the action of the theory. You could look at many of my research papers in this direction. So what you do is you consider the Hilbert-Einstein action, which is Ricci scalar capital R, um, and some constants. And if you want to put cosmological constant, okay, you can do that. Plus, now you can add, let us say, electromagnetic field, if you like, -1/4 at minimum. If you like, you could take the Lagrangian corresponding to the to the complex scalar field so that you are able to describe. But for boson stars, you do need potential also of the scalar field itself. Okay, and if you want these stars to be compact, then this conical potential is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the boundaries of the stars, they remain uh, diffused. Okay, they are not sharp boundaries. And what you do is, not only for the boson stars in general, if you want to consider any gravity theory, what you do is you consider it in the presence of gravity, which means you also replace the volume and element d4x by d4x into square root of minus g, where g is the determinant of g mu nu, where g mu nu is the metric tensor. So what happens here in gravity theory, g mu nu becomes a field by itself with its, if you like, 16 components. G mu nu for a four-dimensional theory would be would have 16 components. Of course, you can make some unjats and reduce these numbers. Okay, so but I mean the fields here, the G mu nu itself becomes a field. In all other theories that I talked in my talk today, in the standard model, in field theory, scalar field, vector field, spinor field, the G mu nu was fixed with the -1 +1 +1 +1 or +1 -1 -1 -1. So the coefficients of dt square, dr square, d theta square, or dx square, dy square, dz, they were constants in Minkowski space. So you were in Minkowski space. But as soon as you go to Minkowski space, gravity is switched off. You see. So if you want to have gravity theory into I mean, you wish to study, then you have to introduce this square root of minus g. So you are studying a theory in the presence of gravity. However, if you include capital R, which is Ricci scalar, which you can construct from Ricci tensor, which in turn is constructed from a Riemann tensor, then you explicitly, that is the explicit gravitational field present in your theory, like pi or pi star or a mu or psi. Okay, I mean the Dirac spinor field. So I mean and I think that defines. You see, but for boson stars, you see, the boundary conditions are also important. Otherwise, in the same theory, you might get some other solutions. So for obtaining the boundary states like boson stars, for neutron stars, fermionic field would be needed very much in the action. For boson stars, you can set to 0 the fermionic degrees of freedom. Okay, but electromagnetic field could or could not be present. It depends on your choice, how you like. Okay, some people like to use a tie, some people just like to have a shirt. And you see, so that is different. But square root of minus g, I mean, invariant volume element has to include square root of minus, where g is the determinant of g mu nu, where g mu nu is the metric tensor, which is now a full-fledged field, which means it's a function of x mu. Okay, in Minkowski space, that's not true. These coefficients, I mean, or this entire g mu nu is fixed. And if you consider these orthogonal, I mean, non-diagonal elements to be 0, and only diagonal elements, they are constant, having constant coefficients. Okay, so if you go to Minkowski space, then gravity would be gone.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I hope it helps.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Abhijit,
okay,
please.
okay. Most welcome, most welcome.
Sir, next question is from Bikram Kesri from MSc
Yeah.
Part 2. It's a
Yeah.
second semester.
Yeah, yes, most
Bikram,
welcome.
please. Bikram. Bikram. It seems Bikram is not here, so we'll
Okay.
go on to the next question. Is
Okay.
from Avanish. Avanish.
Yes,
Avanish,
Yes,
yes,
sir.
yes,
please.
yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Avnish. Welcome. Please.
Sir, my question is why complex number are needed to do operation in quantum mechanics? And referring to your lecture 14, where you discussed about the complex linear vector space. Please explain this and provide its physical interpretation.
Yeah, actually, I do not remember what I have taught in my lecture 14. But I mean, if you, I mean, this, I really do not have a better answer at the moment. But complex numbers, I mean, in general, if you, how would you then define probability amplitudes if your psi is real? So psi by definition, by construction, is complex, right? And so if you want to define these wave functions or the state vectors, which could be rewritten in terms of the wave functions, they have to be expressed in terms of complex numbers. Okay, I mean, in linear vector spaces, I mean real linear vector spaces, I don't think you can describe quantum mechanics. I mean, we teach it in mathematical physics, linear vector spaces in properties, for making you aware of all these. Because I haven't heard my own lectures for quite some time now. Okay, and right now my purpose was to give you an exposure of how one could think. I mean, beyond the textbook material. And so it is this C1, C2, C1 square, C2 square, they are C1 star C1, C2 star C2. So, I mean, even in your wave function approach, it is psi star psi into dqx that gives you the probability of finding the particle in the volume dqx, and if you integrate it over the entire space, then you call it the probability of finding the particle somewhere in this entire space. Okay, so but I must say I don't remember the precise answer to your question.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Please
Thank you.
mute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So next question is from second semester student Vinita. Maybe Vinita, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Vinita. Okay, it seems she has left. So we'll go on to the next question. The next question is from Pusparaj, semester 4. Pusparaj, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir,
Welcome.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, what is the origin of energy and time uncertainty principle, sir? What is the origin?
Once again, please tell me. In the uncertainty principle.
Yes, sir, time energy uncertainty principle.
Yes, sir. Am I? If I get your question correctly, you mean delta E into delta T?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So let me. The answer is very simple. What happens if you see, as soon as you start talking about Minkowski space or spatial relativity, then time, of course, multiplied by c because of the dimensional regions. So this is to be treated on par with x, y, and z. So what happens in this spatial relativity approach? You no longer distinguish between. Is that okay? I wasn't able to see myself. So you see, what was your, yes. So you see, so actually, let me clarify for a wider understanding. These uncertainty relations hold true between any two canonical pair of variables. Okay. So how do you define canonical pair? You go back to classical mechanics. You construct the canonical momentum, which is the correct definition of momentum. So pi, this is partial derivative of L with respect to qi dot. So this qi and pi, they form a canonical pair of variables, and obviously they also obey canonical Hamilton's canonical equations of motion. But primarily, what is canonical with what? So x px, you derive px. So px is del L over del x dot. P by is del L over del by dot. Pz is del L over del z dot. You see this energy actually, which is written here, E, if you go to the time-like component. So E by C is the time-like component of momentum. You see, what is a 4 momentum? 4 momentum has its 4 components, P0, P1, P2, P3. P1, P2, P3 are your usual momenta, Px, Py, Pz. What about P0? This P0 is E by C. This is time-like component of the momentum. So this E is actually momentum. So E by C multiplied by C into T. C into T is your playing the role of a coordinate. Okay. So in Minkowski space, you Ct is to be treated on par with x, y, and z. Is this okay? So E and T, they do form a canonical pair of variables, and therefore this uncertainty relation holds. Does that satisfy you? But I believe this is the precisely correct answer.
Yes, sir. But I'm interested in the algebraic solution, sir. Sir, according to the discussion of the M-time relation, sir, here Heisenberg principle. According to Heisenberg principle, this relation is solved by the Heisenberg principle. I am not interested in any other relation. I am only interested in that like as a root valence of T. Only time, sir. How can we solve that time?
Your question is not clear to me.
I am interested only in time, sir. How can we solve the time on the behalf of root valence theory?
No. But what do you mean by solving for time? You see, in what you do in some of my lectures, you see, in quantum mechanics, you have quantum mechanical operators associated with all observables. Okay, and here also you have some equations of motion like you had in classical mechanics. So here, like space translation operator, time translation operator is called as time evolution operator. You see, so these 3 examples, they present the examples from continuous symmetry: space translation, time translation, and rotation. Okay, so
yes, sir.
So Hamiltonian is the generator of time translations. Momentum is the generator of space translations. Angular momentum is the generator of the rotations. Okay, and if you, I do not know if you want to solve something, you are interested in studying the time evolution of it. You also know Heisenberg equation of motion. This our friend had Dirac. I am a great fan of Mr. Paul Dirac. So what you see, the dynamical evolution of a classical dynamical variable is given by dA by dt is partial derivative del A by dt plus the Poisson bracket of A with H, Hamiltonian. And you see, this was one of the genesis of Mr. Dirac, that he said that the Poisson bracket in classical phase space, this in classical theory, this corresponds to a quantum mechanical computation relation in the quantum theory. So you replace the Poisson bracket corresponds to minus iota by h cross times the commutation relation. And if you do that in that equation, then what you arrive at is the equation called as the Heisenberg equation. This was actually derived by Mr. Paul Dirac. Out of his modesty, he called it Heisenberg equation of motion. And you see, you can write down these Schrodinger equations, Heisenberg equations, both for a time evolution operator. You see, so you can that actually describes the quantum dynamics. So you consider it's usually denoted by U. Okay, U of T1, T2. It evolves a state vector from time. You define a state vector at time T1, and you define a state vector at time T2, later time T2. And if you apply this first state vector with this time evolution operator U of T2 to T1, T1 to T2, it evolves this state vector from the time T1 to T2. On both sides, as I said at the beginning, if you multiply this, I mean, if you take the inner product of this with the position space eigenbra or momentum space eigenbra, then you obviously you can talk of the same thing in terms of the wave functions. So these are two alternatively equivalent ways of considering the thing. But what is important here is the time evolution operator. You see, so the entire perturbation theory is actually based on this time evolution operator. You write down the Schrodinger equation for this operator, and you invert this equation to write an integral equation. Then you solve it from time initial time t0 to some time t2, then t2 to t3, t3 to t4, and finally tn minus 1 to tn. What you obtain is the Dyson series. Okay, this is an infinite product. Okay, of this involving the interaction Hamiltonian. And if you want to, if you switch over to field theory, as the logic, as I told you, the steps are the same. So in that case, the interaction Hamiltonian is a function of x mu, and nth order term in this perturbation series would involve a product and product of h interaction n times. Okay, hi of at the point x mu 1, hi at the point x mu 2, and so on. And why is this perturbation theory important? You see, this perturbation theory, you see, without this perturbation theory, you can understand process, a process, it's scattering process. You need this language of Feynman diagrams. You have to go order by order of perturbation theory. So, for example, for a simplest QED theory, quantum electrodynamics, the interaction term you might recollect is psi bar a mu psi bar a mu slash psi. So, and all the three quantities at the same space time point x1. So actually, this gives rise to 8 terms. You decompose this psi and a mu into positive and negative frequency parts. You take the product of 2 terms into 2 terms is 4 terms into another 2 terms, 8 terms. So this gives rise to 8 fundamental vertices in the QED theory. So for example, electron, positron scattering, electron positron annihilation, electron positron creation, electron electron scattering, positron scattering, and all with the emission of a photon or with the absorption of a photon. So this makes 8 diagrams, and you see these 8 fundamental. Similarly, you can do in electroweak theory. Similarly, you can do in QCD theory. But the basic interaction, but you can prove mathematically in perturbation theory that contribution due to all odd order terms, they vanish identically. So only even order terms they contribute in the transition amplitude. And this has to do with the charge and mass of these Bayer particles. So interaction vertices, I mean fundamental interaction vertices, they have these particles which are Bayer particles. Nobody has seen them. The moment you see them, they become physically interacting particles. And the two are, their properties are related through the renormalization properties. Okay. In some later talk, I might talk on these things further. But so the Bayer particles, they have infinite.
Hello. Then you take the last question if sir is available, and then we will end the lecture.
Okay, sir. We have only I think 3 to 4 questions left. That's all.
But now you can see the internet connectivity is not very
It's
healthy.
giving problems. So yeah, maybe
Right.
restrict to maybe 2-3 questions more, but in short.
Because sir is taking answer is very, very long and in detail.
Yeah.
So that's why it's taking some time. We are
Okay.
30 minutes more after the lecture.
Okay, sir.
Now he disconnected and maybe he will connect again.
Yes, sir. Maybe he might be trying to connect.
Right. Even this video we should edit because we have a long pause during the whole lecture. We should edit and then we can post. That will be good.
Hello. Am I audible once again?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Sure,
sir.
sir. So Budhenji, take few more questions
Yeah.
and then
Sure.
we will end the session.
No,
Yeah.
no problem. No problem. Most welcome.
Yeah.
But
We have 4 questions left actually. So
no problem. I'm in no hurry. I try to do my best to.
okay. Okay. So next
Okay.
question is from Aishwarya. Aishwarya, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Mhm.
Okay, if she is not here, maybe we'll move on to the next one. Maybe
Mhm.
Preeti, please unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, my question is how do measurements collapse the quantum wave function?
Oh, I'm really not prepared to answer this question. I'm sorry. I think I read this, but at the 11th hour, I didn't have enough time to look into these things.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
I
sir.
would prefer.
Thank
I
you.
would prefer not to give you a wrong answer.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, next is Niman. Niman, are you here? Okay, maybe Supriya. Okay, Supriya is also not here. I think
Mhm.
today I think we are facing a lot of internet problem.
Yeah, there is some.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
had a.
even
So I think now we are done with the questions because these guys who have asked the question are right now they are not online. So maybe we can have end up the session. Now over to Venkatesh, sir. Yeah, Venkatesh, sir.
sir,
No problem.
today we learned really very exciting lecture, and we are thankful and grateful to you for sparing your scheduled time with us, and you gave just like a very wide spectrum of introduction of quantum mechanics, and I hope it will be very helpful for our student. At least it must show some seed of interest in quantum mechanics of our student. So, and during your lecture, I realized that once a person, once a professor, is always professor, and its knowledge
You're
and
so
his
kind.
knowledge is free from position and only depends on the time and their hard work. So, with these few words, I would like to thank you once again, sir, for sharing your time. And in future, if pandemic ends, and then we would like to see you at our university physically
Oh, sure,
and
sure,
delivering
sure,
lecture.
sure. Venkatesh ji, I also extend my heartfelt thanks to you and to your entire
Thank
team
you, sir.
and to all the students. Actually, I find that they are very well motivated and feeling very enthusiastic.
Right.
And so I really enjoyed it. You see, a teacher would be a teacher only if there are good students around.
Correct, sir. Perfectly correct. True.
So students make us become a teacher.
Yes, teacher. Yes, perfectly right, sir. So I would also like to thank my team, Science Lecture Series team, Dr. Budhendra ji, Vijay Raj ji, Dr. Puneet Misra, Lakhvinder, and Nitin Chandra ji. Thank you for your support and cooperation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
And Buddham Saranam Gacchami.
Thank you, sir.
Namaskar.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.